So welcome to Module 2 of Easy Ways to Take Better Photos with your digital SLR, and I hope you enjoyed the first one and you've learned a little bit about holding your camera and all that good stuff that you might not have known before. This one we're going to be a little bit more practical in terms of your camera menus and modes, and have a look at some of the modes that you might not have known that what they meant or what they were for, and how they affect your photographs. So we're going to look at those three most powerful automatic modes in your digital SLR, and we're going to look at times when you should use them. So let's first off start by looking at what's called the mode dial. Now every digital SLR has a mode dial. It could be at the top, at the left or the right side of your camera, and if you have a Sony camera it's probably on the back. You might have to look within a function setting to find that particular set of features, but it is there. But on the Canons, which is pictured here, it's on the top, and on the Nikons it's on the top as well, but it's some of the terminology is slightly different. So just take a look at your own camera and see where yours is at and what different functions you have, and take time to look through your manual and see if you can figure out what they each mean. Now up here at the top in the red box is what we call the creative zone, and the modes that are accessed in here in this creative zone are things when you want to try and get a little bit more out of your photography and learn to use it in a more manual way. You have program auto mode, aperture priority mode, shutter priority mode, manual mode, and this one up here called ADEP. Now those modes are something that we deal with in other courses that I offer, particularly the Get Out of Auto course, and before that our Demystify Your DSLR. We touch on what those mean as well, but we're not going to talk about those today. What we are going to talk about today is the automatic zone down here, where we have some little icons that represent some of the most important and the most frequently used types of frequently taken types of photographs. So let's have a look at some of them and see if we can decipher some of these hieroglyphics. The first one here is the green auto, or the green square, or it could be a green smiley face. Pretty much it's the full automatic mode. Now if you're using your camera just very basically right now, that's probably the setting that you've been using, and that's good. You know, you will find at some point that it will become restrictive for you and you'll want to push yourself on a little bit in your photography, but that's okay. You know that you can pretty much switch it to this green auto and it's going to give you a fairly well exposed shot. The next one down here is the portrait mode, and that is for taking photos of people, and we're going to look at that in more detail in a second. You also have landscape mode, you have macro mode. Macro is for taking things that are very tiny or very small and having them enlarged really quite big, bigger than life size. So that is a fun little setting to play with. You have this little guy running here, which is to signify sports or action shots. And then you have a night portrait mode here, which can be very powerful used the right way. And then here, this is your flash off mode for when you want to control that flash off setting. So let's have a look at some of those important ones here. Now the first one that we're going to look at is the portrait mode. Now a portrait is a photograph of a person, generally one person on its own, and a portrait shot, just like the old paintings were considered portraits, a portrait is usually taken head and shoulders or from their torso up. It could be a full-length portrait, but generally it's just one person on their own or two people on their own. Group shots aren't necessarily a portrait, even though there are people in them. People that are moving around, that's not really a portrait. Portrait is usually quite posed. And so what happens when you switch your camera into portrait mode? It does certain things to the exposure settings to help it make the correct give it the correct look. So most people with portraits, they want their subject to be nice and sharp and they want the background to be blurry, and so in order for that to happen, the camera selects a wide open aperture. Now again, outside the scope of this course, what aperture is and all of that sort of stuff, and that is covered in other courses that I do, but for right now all you need to know is that when the camera selects that wide open aperture in portrait mode, it will slightly blur the background. And that's the look that you want for a portrait shot. You want your subject to stand out from the background. There's to be a separation there. Now, something that a lot of people don't realize that these modes do is that they also put what's called a digital filter over your images, and so that helps to create a little bit of a look and feel to the image that you might not just get when you're shooting in the green auto. And in portrait mode in particular, this creates a softer skin tone look, so it kind of gives it a little bit of a softer look. Now you can certainly experiment with that, and indeed if you go into the menu settings you can change that, so you can make it very customizable. So you know, feel free to experiment with your camera and the menu in there, but that is what the pre-setting is, to soften skin tone and just give a little softer look to your image. So this sort of a shot here this is what could be considered a portrait shot. It is in black and white, which adds to kind of the drama of the photo, but you can see what I'm talking about with a blurry background here, that the background is blurred out, even the subject's ears have blurred out here, and her eyes are what is in focus. Landscape mode is the next one around, and here you'll see it represented by these little hills and a little cloud or something similar to that. And what happens in landscape mode is the camera selects a narrow aperture, which is the flip-flop of that wide aperture setting that you get with a portrait mode. So in landscape mode, that narrow aperture means that everything is now in focus from where you can see to infinity. And this is what you want for landscape photography, for wide open scenery, for architectural pictures. Usually you want everything in focus from what your eye can see to infinity. But something that landscape mode also does is it intensifies the greens and the blues. So if you've got a green grass or the blue sky, that's actually going to be made a little bit more punchier if you shoot in the landscape mode. Now again, that's all controllable within the camera settings. If you have a look at your manual, you'll see how to do that. But something that will add to your landscapes rather than just taking them in the pure, straightforward green auto setting. Here is a shot of a castle over here over at home in Ireland, and although we do have green grass, this is a little bit greener than it really probably looked in reality. So again, it has been punched up a little bit by using that landscape mode, and you can see that everything in the shot is sharp from the what's here in the foreground right until the background. Now with every photograph there will be a point where it will fall out of focus, so back here these trees and hills aren't as sharp as maybe what it is up here on the castle, and that's just the way of photography. You know, the lens that I was using doesn't have the ability to focus super far away, but you know, for landscapes, landscape mode will definitely help you with that. Now, the final mode that we're going to look at, the third most important automatic setting, is sports mode. So if you find yourself shooting a lot of sports photography, and this doesn't have to be Formula One or anything that's super fast, it could just be your kids playing their soccer game or running outside in the yard or playing on the bikes. Sports mode is what you want because that's going to help the camera select a fast shutter speed. And by selecting a fast shutter speed, it means that the camera is going to freeze action. So if possible, when you're shooting sports, use a fast shutter speed, and an easy way to do that is just to switch it to the sports mode. Now it will also change the shooting mode to a continuous shooting mode, which means that you can keep your finger switched on the camera shutter button and it will continually take photographs. So you'll end up with an awful lot more photos than just one or two, because you'll take maybe 5 or 6 for every one that you might do if it was just on the single shot mode. But you know, with sports action and things happen so fast, you want to be able to make sure that you capture that shot. The final thing that sports mode does is it actually changes your focus mode. It changes your focus mode from a single focus mode where you're just taking one shot at a time to servo focus, which means that it will continually change where the focus point is depending on where your subject is. So it's actually locked in on your subject, and that's really important for moving subjects. If you've ever tried to take a good photograph of a toddler, you'll probably want to be using servo focus mode. So sports mode does all of that for you all in one setting. And as I said, it doesn't have to be used for a sports shot. It can be used for just inside jumping on the bed, playing around, freezing action. Now, I will say it's not the best shot, it's not the best mode for taking inside shots unless you've got an awful lot of very bright light or natural light or artificial light, because it does, that fast shutter speed, it does require a lot of light for it to work properly. So just experiment with that. So that ends module 2, and I hope you have enjoyed learning about those 3 important automatic modes: your portrait mode, your landscape mode, and your sports mode. In module 3, your final module, we're going to learn about the very most important thing that you need to do to get your photos super clear and sharp and in focus.